Hey there, my name is Bill Marion, and this is A Nose for Life. Well, it's raining here in the Tennessee Valley. I would rather it be snow because it's January, and you would think that it would be snowing in January, but like the great poet Miguel Jaguar used to say, you can't always get what you want. I like poetry. Poetry's nice. The following video is an excerpt from a live stream that I conducted with Greg Slayden, the founder of peakbagger.com. It was an honor to interview this guy. He is amazing. The website, peakbagger.com, is kind of famous, man. Mountaineers all over the country use peakbagger.com to get information about mountains. I'm not sponsored by peakbagger.com, but this site is my go-to source when I'm trying to find information about any of the mountains or mountain ranges we visit to make videos for our channel. I want the information in our videos to be right, and I've learned to trust peakbagger.com to have the most accurate information. And you should too. Maybe you're planning a fun family vacation and you're just doing some research about the mountains. Or maybe you're planning a hiking or serious mountaineering adventure. Peakbagger.com is a great source. But regardless of what kind of trip you're planning, you need to know some lingo, especially when it comes to how mountains are measured. Greg is going to talk about mountain prominence. Now, when you're talking about a mountain's prominence, that's something different than a mountain's elevation. Finding out a mountain's prominence can really be helpful in understanding what to expect at your destination. Our full-length live stream is only about 45 minutes long, and if you'd rather watch that, just click on the tab on the top right corner of your screen. You know, I'm so grateful that Greg took the time to do this interview. It was such an honor. As always, there are links in the description, so go ahead and click the like button and let's get started. And the fact that there's a little bit of a rivalry, maybe if you want to call it that, between people that just don't understand why measuring mountain prominence is, why it's a thing. Like, why don't we just use the elevation of a mountain? I mean, that's what we were taught in school. Like, if you're taught Mount Mitchell is the highest mountain in the Appalachian Mountains, why isn't that good enough? Why is it that when I talk about Mount Mitchell being the highest mountain east of the Mississippi, inevitably someone from New Hampshire or someone from the Northeast in general will chime in and they'll say, yeah, but Mount Washington has the highest prominence. And I'm like, why do I care? Well, Greg's going to explain some reasons. He's been doing this a long time. He's going to explain some of the reasons why mountain prominence is a big deal to a lot of people and why measuring mountain prominence is important. What does it mean to measure mountains by their prominence? Right. You're going to hit all kinds of stuff like this. So, Greg, I'll let you begin and just talk about this. What exactly is mountain prominence, and why is it an important measurement in geography or mountaineering?
It's one of those concepts that is kind of simple but kind of hard to explain at the same time. The best way I find to introduce it is a lot of people are used to a list, say, of the highest mountains in a certain place, like the highest mountains in North Carolina or the highest mountains in New Hampshire or whatever. And you quickly run into a problem when you're compiling this list. You know what the highest is, and then you say, oh, and here's the second highest one. But what counts as a peak? In other words, is every little rock on the ridge a separate peak? Is every little hump, every little bump, is that a peak? You find yourself, when you're creating this elevation-based list, you have to have a cutoff of like, oh, the peak has to rise a certain amount before it can be considered a real peak. So in general, like in the Appalachians, I think it's about a 200-foot rule tends to be there, which says that a peak has to rise 200 feet above its connecting saddle or gap with the next peak, and then it's a real peak. Then it goes on the list. So that's a pretty standard way. But the interesting thing is that 200 feet, that's the prominence cutoff, actually. You know, if you're on Mount Mitchell, like say, and you hike north towards Mount Craig, and there's a low point in the ridge, that low point is the prominence saddle for Mount Craig. And Mount Craig rises maybe a couple hundred feet above that, and that's the prominence of Mount Craig. So that's all well and fine. So actually, prominence is already used for elevation lists. Does that make sense, Bill?
Yeah, it makes sense, especially if you're saying, okay, we're going to define a peak by this standard. Mm-hmm. So prominence is only saying, look, this is how we officially define a peak. But let me tell you what a lot of people will say. I made a video a few years ago. Is Mont Eagle really a mountain? Because okay, technically it's a plateau and it's
Right.
not a mountain. Okay.
Sure.
Or if I'm talking about the Alleghenies, every now and then somebody will chime in, but those are not mountains, those are plateaus, which is sort of an eye roll because you want to go, okay, we know. But if you're hiking, why does that matter if you're hiking? And what does it mean if it's called a mountain? You know, it's Mount such and such. And the people around the town and around the locals there, they're like, yeah, that's mountain.
The word mountain is really kind of, or hill or bump or plateau, it's all just terms. But when you start looking at it analytically, you say people want to know purely objectively, not what people call it or not what the language says it is. They want to know, is this peak a mountain or not? Prominence is the best way to define that. And the formal definition of prominence is the amount of peak rises above its connecting saddle with a higher peak. So for any peak in the world, almost, you can follow a ridge to a higher peak. And then if you just find the lowest point on that little walk you did, then measure from that up to the top of the peak, then that's the prominence. So it's a very simple measurement. That tells you objectively, without any regard to what the locals at the foot of the hill call it, or what it says on the map, or what the list makers decide. That number for the peak is objective, fact-based, and can't be changed, the prominence. So that's why a lot of people are really kind of into it. They're like, oh, wow, here's a measure that tells me how big or important a mountain is without resorting to any sort of arbitrariness.
But Greg, because it sounds almost though like it's marketing. Now hear me out on this. Hear me out. Because so you've got New Hampshire, okay? Yeah. New Hampshire claims to have the most 4,000 foot peaks east of the Mississippi. That's what they claim. And they've got a website. And listen, by the way, if you're from New Hampshire, I love New Hampshire. I'm a huge New England.
I do too. I grew up hiking there. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. I think Carolyn and I, we can't wait to go back. We just got back here, back from New England this past in October. In fact, check out that playlist, guys. If you're watching, great playlist. They will claim that they have the most 4,000 foot peaks of anybody else east of the Mississippi. But the average elevation in West Virginia, if I'm not mistaken, is 1,500 feet or something like that. I can't remember, but I think over 100 4,000 foot mountains. How is it fair? Okay, by the definition you're giving, I can definitely see how New Hampshire would make that claim. It takes away from the fact of the amazing mountains that are in West Virginia. I mean, if I'm from West Virginia, I'm going to cry foul. It almost sounds like what is it called? The Appalachian Mountain Club. They've been around since 1857.
1876. Yeah.
1876. All right. So they've been around a long time. Great group, by the way. And of course, I'm just picking here, but it's almost like it's been marketed in a certain way. But it's a little misleading, though. If you're looking for a state with the most mountains, you would think it would just automatically be West Virginia as far as east of the Mississippi. But because of mountain prominence, it almost gives, if we're talking about the tourist industry, it almost gives New Hampshire this edge. And if you've ever been to West Virginia, man, it's all mountain. The whole state's just one mountain after another. What is your comeback to the critics who say New Hampshire is cheating?
Well, the actual topography on the ground can't be changed. There are certain things, and prominence, as I said, it's purely mathematical. So by saying that, if the people in New Hampshire say there are more peaks with 2,000 feet of prominence in New Hampshire than West Virginia, that's a fact. That's like saying 2 + 2 = 4. Now, that's not saying anything that the mountains in West Virginia aren't beautiful or have better forests or have better infrastructure or have nicer trails or are more scenic or go on forever or whatever. The average elevation of the state. I mean, the average elevation of a state, that is a fact too. You can actually objectively measure that. And sure, whenever you market something, you always glom onto the fact that helps you the best. Of
right.
Course.
So maybe they are doing that a little, but it's factual.
But prominence, as I said, a lot of the researchers on it are mathematicians, and they look at things in a very objective numerical way, and so. Now, their results don't always match with expectations. There's a similar rivalry out west where the people in Colorado are very proud of all their 14,000 foot peaks, and rightly so. They definitely have the most. And and bear in mind too that the definition of a peak is fundamentally arbitrary because you have to come up with some sort of a prominence cutoff to decide what a peak is. In Washington state, most of the peaks outside of the volcanoes are only about 8,000 feet high. So the Coloradans, they look at the Washington people saying, "Oh, your peaks are like half the height of ours. You guys are lame." But in Washington, because our valleys are deeper between the peaks, we have a lot more prominent peaks in Colorado. We have 144 2,000-foot prominence peaks, and Colorado only has about 70. So, and we say, oh yeah, well, our peaks are better because they're more prominent. Again, it's all marketing, it's all good-natured fun, but it's just another way to look at things. I mean, if you love mountains and you're looking for ones to climb, there are many ways you can do it. You can do it by elevation, you can do it by prominence, you can do it by the best trails, you can do it by the best views. There are all different ways to do it. This prominence, I think, appeals to sort of the engineers, the mathematicians, and it say, hey, if I climb the most prominent mountains, it generally lines up pretty well with the mountains that are the highest and most prominent and most commanding, and that works out pretty well.
But what if I want to say my mountains are bigger than your mountains because they are so many feet above sea level? Shouldn't that matter? I mean, let's just face it, the Black Mountains, largest average elevation of a sub-range in the Appalachians. Doesn't that matter? Doesn't that mean something, Greg? Come on, man. Help.
It does. It does. I mean, if you want to use prominence as a metric to define what a peak is, which is like, say, if it has to have 200 feet of prominence to be a peak. Otherwise, it's just a boulder on a ridge, So if you use that metric, I haven't run the stats on that, but perhaps North Carolina or the South would come out better than New England on that. But, it all depends on what arbitrary cutoff you pick, and then you can get whatever result you want.
So you're kind of saying it's whatever floats your boat.
That's true for hiking. The best climbers are the ones having the most fun. The best hikers are the ones having the most fun.
What a great saying. I need to write that down. The best hikers are the ones having the most fun.
Greg has a lot more to say on the subject, and there's a lot more to the live stream. And you can see this live stream in its entirety. I'll leave a card in just a moment. But I want to thank Greg Slayden with peakbagger.com for taking the time for this interview, and I'm thankful you took the time to watch. Here are some other videos I know you'll enjoy, including the full-length live stream at the top left. Be sure to leave a comment, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. My name is Bill Marion, and this is A Nose for Life.
So